Jambo. Jambo. Jambo Africa. My name is Jackline Mwende, as you've heard, a daughter of Kenya, a daughter of Cumberland. Welcome to Sankova. Sankova is a Twi word from the Akan tribe of Ghana. Where are our Ghanaian friends here? We have them. So it means go back and get it. So it signifies the importance of learning from the past to build the future, and the name encourages us to look back on what happens back so that we can inform our present actions and build our future. Interestingly, the symbol for Sankova is a bird. But this bird is it's walking forward and looking back. Meaning that as you are walking forward, you have to acknowledge the past and how this past has impacted your present and also your future. So indeed, Sankova is a befitting name for this occasion because today's discussion is asking us to go back and fetch what was lost, which is truth, accountability, courage, and justice. Across Africa, the legacy of slavery, colonial injustice, racial oppression is not buried in the past. It is coded in our contemporary economies, land ownership, our education systems, even in what we celebrate and what we keep quiet about. Today, we ask a very important question. To what extent are we as Africans naming and confronting these legacies? Or have we simply inherited silence as part of our post-colonial identity? So we are going to explore this with very knowledgeable panel of experts who will explore this question through the lens of literature, academia, culture, policy, and philosophy. Each of the experts brings a specific and special perspective to guide us into looking at the whole picture. So I would like to invite the panelists here so that we can have this discussion. So I will call upon Kinna Likimani. A big applause for Kinna as she comes. Kinna is a literary critic and a founder of the Sona books. So next I will call Dr. Natasha Shivji, who is a lecturer of history at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. Next, I'm going to call Nana Osei, who works for the African Union, ECOSOC. Applause for him. Then, lastly but not the least, we have Professor Yoporeka Somet, who is the Director, Center for African Renaissance Studies and a philosopher. Thank you. So, without much ado, because we are under pressure, yes, so we are going to go direct to the discussion, and I would encourage the panelists to please keep time. I will be timing you. Someone else is also timing you somewhere. So let's keep time and try to be smart, give specific answers to specific questions. So I want us to start with literature, just looking at how literature preserves memory and fights Africa history from being erased or retold wrongly. So Kinna, as someone reshaping Africa storytelling, how has literature acted as a counter-archive against colonial narratives? And also, are we truly telling our stories, or we are still being guided on how to tell our stories?
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thanks for the organizers for having me. I think the comment I'll make is really, Yvonne is evidence of that, right? Which is that the work that we have to do, the naming, the guidance to name, the sort of, I like to call for better word, since we have to rename, colonization is also a project of deracination and dislocation. Of people, of self, of identity. And so if we, and since we need to restore ourselves, to reintegrate, to name things, literature, but also by extension, the arts, has a bigger role to play. And in fact, it's a leader, it's a guide to get us through this. And so our writers have always insisted on a certain vision in their works, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, whether it's on this side of the Atlantic or on the other side where our brothers and sisters are, have always guided us. Now, the problem we have is that, yes, we are telling our stories. It's not enough. There aren't enough people writing. And in part because we are, and there's so much we put on our education system, right? But if we just pan out, as a continent, we don't prioritize the development of the arts and the development of literary writing, fiction or nonfiction. We don't explore different platforms of telling our stories. And so we are simply not writing enough and telling enough. And part of it is also because we haven't begun the process of, for lack of a better term, decolonization. This business of even categorizing and naming what has happened, of listing all, we haven't started. We haven't prioritized it. Africans are born into struggle, this particular struggle. This is the struggle of our lives. But we haven't, as a continent, said, or even as smaller countries said, this is what we need to do. If you do that, then you are going to identify the arts and literature as a way in which people, one, can easily access the stories of the past, can also, when Yvonne talks about the horror, you know, the horror is more palatable in literature, you know? It just is. Things we can accept a lot more and interrogate a lot more through literature, through the arts, because of the access, the immediate access to the emotions. And Yvonne said a lot, right? But in the end, it's like she guided us. See what I'm trying to say? We need guides, and that's what art is, and that's what literature is, right? And then on the other part of the work that we have to do is reimagining ourselves anew. And we're simply not going to do that without the arts and without literature. But we haven't, as a people, decided that this is the sort of thing that we need to be doing. And accessing and repairing, restitution, all the things we need to do through creativity. Which also brings to issue of the languages we want to write in. I mean, you know, I'm not a fan of the United Nations, but they have a statistic I like to quote, which is that Africa is the only continent in which its children begin formal education in foreign languages. This does not, by the way, loosen our tongue and our memory. So this thing where we hide, and I don't know whether it happens in Kenya or other African countries, but in Ghana, for instance, the bourgeoisie see it fit to not teach their children Ghanaian languages. This is not going to help us. In fact, this is going to make it 10 times more difficult, as infinitely, because we are talking about accessing our pain and accessing our horrors and loosening up our memories and loosening up our tongues to speak, and doing so in a manner that brings a lot of people into the process and not disenfranchising people based on how well they speak English, French, or Portuguese.
Thank you so much, Nana Likimani. So we'll get back to that thought. We'll get back to that. And talking about literature, we cannot not talk about education, because literature is part of education. And that's where I want to come to Dr. Natasha Shivji. In terms of education, which is, we say it's a melting pot of memory and history. So education was once used as a tool of domination in Africa continent. So has it become a tool of liberation yet? And what are the barriers that still stop, for example, universities from decolonizing the curricula, for example?
It's working, right? Thanks for that. I think that the question of decolonization and universities has increasingly become the platform for liberation, right? That is the language which has been used to symbolize spaces of freedom and liberation in educational institutions, particularly universities. But much like the discourse of reparations, it leaves much to the imagination. I teach a course on African economic history at the University of Cape Town, and I just gave them an assignment recently to imagine that they were interviewing, of course, post facto with the benefit of retrospect, Kwame Nkrumah, Amilcar Cabral, or Julius Nyerere. And I just finished grading the assignment. But one thing that stood out the most in these 41 papers was their fascination with the idea of the compradorial and the bureaucratic bourgeoisie, right? And the formulation of how the compradorial and the bureaucratic bourgeoisie were so central to the fears of these early thinkers and these early political leaders, that the centralization of the state, the development of institutions of higher learning without state control, how the economy unfolded, very much linked to the state. The fear was that it could create a particular class that would not work in the interests of the people but foreign capital and perpetuate the very same cycle. But in this case, that cycle would not be perpetuated, and this might be a controversial, unsettled topic, not perpetuated from the germ of colonialism itself, but from the post-independent state working with a new form of capital, right? So this new form of capital that is emerging, and the one that is, and the very discourse, the very kind of political discourse that is emerging at this time to counter the new form of capital in the form of neocolonialism, different ways of imperialism, etc. The fear was always that it might produce a class that works for that capital, that is outside of ours. And that became a point of great fascination for the students, because then they started asking the question, so who is the enemy? When we speak of neocolonialism, when we speak of imperialism, when we speak of we versus them, the way capital is siphoned out from our states is through a very kind of, there is a certain way, a systemic way in which a particular class has been created, siphoning out this capital. Now, if we think of it in this way, is there a possibility of thinking of educational institutions outside these systems? Are they hijacked by these systems? In which case, what is our response to that? Many of our universities have become these consumer market-driven institutions. Many of them are in the clutches of the state, those that are public institutions. So once again, you have what I would like to call a compradorial intellectual and a bureaucratic intellectual. A compradorial intellectual serving students as if they're consumers and looking for aid and research funds constantly, and a bureaucratic intellectual constantly pushing administrative papers. What universities produced in such a context? So much like the anti-colonial movement and the fears of what they would harbor with a very kind of strong centralized system, we have to think along those lines today when we talk about decolonization. If we strongly try to organize the university institutions and their forms of leadership, etc., simply through representational politics, simply through anti-politics, we might be actually creating a representational petty bourgeoisie within the state that is serving the very same interests that we thought we were trying to dismantle. So how do we think of broad-based movements today? I think that's the question that I would like to come back to. What are broad-based movements beyond simply the question of an us versus them? How do these broad-based movements function within the continent? And how do we interrogate imperialism as something outside the continent and not harboring different factions and not creating different factions and splitting up struggles from within?
Thank you so much, Dr. Natasha. Dr. Natasha, you've spoken about systems and dismantling systems. And I think this takes both policy and legislation frameworks. And that's where I move to Nana Osei from African Union. Nana, the continental declarations on reparations sound very powerful on paper. When we look at the Abuja in 1993 and Accra 2022, yet sometimes we would say, as you hear the challenges we are hearing from the other panelists, the implementation is still shaky. Where is the challenge? Is it political will, unity, or just fear of reopening the wounds?
Thank you very much. I think it's definitely a multi-dimensional issue. And I think it's important that we are able to have conversations that brings in all of the relevant voices and actors, because you're not going to be able to achieve real repair that is meaningful and concrete and long-lasting if it's just going to be limited to the confines of the institution alone. So I think within the African Union, we are looking at it as what people will say a whole of society approach, but basically who are all of the players, who are all of the stakeholders who are affected, and making sure that all of those different parts of the puzzle come together. As far as the AU policy trajectory is concerned, yes, in the past few years, I think starting from maybe 2022, we have seen a flurry of legislation and policy making, specifically clearing the way for unified action on reparations, restitution, and repair. But I think it's important to note that this is not something that is emerging out of a vacuum. I think if you look at the history of the African Union, which emerged from the Organization of African Unity, which was an anti-colonial project, I think you will find that the AU as an institution has a natural disposition to issues like reparatory justice. You looked at, I think, around, even within the OAU, the period of the OAU, there's a lot of organization, interaction, and engagement that took place both within civil society and within the OAU as an institution itself to set the stage for the climate that we have now, which I think is the most conducive as it's been for a while, with regard to getting a consolidation in our voice as a continent with regard to reparations, starting from the Abuja Declaration, as you said, and then working its way through to the Durban Declaration, and then emerging into the African Union. In the last few years, we've had the Accra Proclamation, which has really set the stage policy-wise in terms of how we are going to organize ourselves. Is really to help us to move beyond, okay, now we have this commitment within the member states to do something about this question of reparations. So now where we are is what exactly that something can look like. And I think we've heard this morning all of the different the different aspects of that conversation, which are sometimes quite difficult to grasp. But I think one thing that is encouraging from the institutional perspective is that we have the opportunity now to put together a common African position and program of action on reparations that will allow the concept and the idea to be defined and determined by Africans. Because you've seen in the past, even at the UN level with the UN decade, you don't really see how African voices and African positioning was reflected in those kinds of documents. So this really allows Africans on the continent and the diaspora to be able to conceptualize and basically set the parameters of how we are going to pursue the issue of reparative justice. So I would say that the political climate is good. For the first time, we have decisions at the level of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government saying that we need to pursue this agenda. So what we now need to do is to take advantage of that climate and make sure that we are able to build out a policy framework that allows us to be able to achieve what we are looking for. And I think it's really important that we are able to build coalitions around this. As I mentioned, the African Union cannot, in a vacuum, achieve or realize reparations on behalf of the African people. We have to work together with the African people, and I think that's really critical that we're able to build coalitions with all aspects of society, both here on the continent and in the diaspora, so that we're able to create the necessary momentum that will be important in sustaining the struggle to its rightful conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Listening to Kinna, Natasha, and Nana, we could see that the systems that have been mentioned are struggling to move from a space. There's that recognition that we need to move to a place where we can tell our stories and we can form structures and systems that support the African history and the rebuilding of Africa after the destruction of colonialism. Professor Somet, could you talk about what would Africa Renaissance look like? And do you think we will be able to move from inherited identity to self-defined one as Africans, looking at what we are talking about, literature, education, policy, political, and so forth? Are Africans able to unlearn the colonial consciousness at a collective level? What would be the challenge, and what do you see as the outlook of this?
Thank you. I thank everybody for this discussion. I thank the organizers for the festival. When I got the invitation for this festival, I got the same feeling as the sister who talked before, the sister of the Nile. But I had a different reaction because I'm working at the Dankimate University of Technology. My background is philosophy and Egyptology, and we are also setting this Center for African Renaissance Studies because we believe in the idea of Renaissance, because we have gone through these damages and evils of colonialism, colonization, colonial mentality, slavery, etc., etc. And we believe that we existed before slavery, we existed before colonialism, etc., etc. And we should reconnect with ourselves, with our origin. I'm very happy also because this is the first edition of this festival on reparation, and it happened here in Kenya, in a place where we know that we have a common relation with this land as human beings. I'm not talking only about African, as human beings. This is the birthplace of the origin of all humanity. Either you are white, black, yellow, we all come from here. And our common ancestors, they came from here. Now, who were these ancestors? They were creators of civilization. Okay, we were told this is not a conference, it is a festival, but allow me to mention a single name of a scholar, Sheikh Anta Diop. Okay, in his work, he tried to asked us to reconnect with our remotest history. So if the origin of humanity, and it is here, the origin of civilization is also here. The invention of technology, I'm teaching in the University of Technology. When I say that to my students, they are amazed. But the archaeological facts are there. The technology started somewhere in this country, Turkana Basin, 3.3 million years ago. We have different inventions in Africa, the invention of fire, the domestication of animals and crops, the invention of writing, the invention of governance, the first state, political organization. It was here on this continent. And this area was called Kemet by the people, by the original founder of this civilization. And they are the children of the Nile and the Sahara. So what do we do about all this story? Long before slavery, long before colonialism, long before the colonial mentality. And the colonial mentality was, its aim was to wipe all this story out. And if we want a renaissance, and we do want it, is to reconnect, simply reconnect with the spirit of creativity and learn about those ancestors of ours, what they have done. Talking about Kemet, they have written extensively, and their writing system was the first, not only in Africa, but in the world. I repeat, their writing system was not only the first in this continent, but the first in the world. We have many documents dealing with many disciplines. My discipline is philosophy. I can tell you something. I'm supposed to teach the history of technology, mathematics, sciences like chemistry to those students, and the documents are there in the ancient Egyptian language that we call Medunetche. We can learn it and reappropriate this creativity, these sciences, and you cannot talk about Renaissance if you don't know what happened, what your history is. So we have to go back to that. We may not need to take into account all what they have done, but we know what the future we want to build, or our present, what we need for ourselves today. So we take the element we need so that we can build our own present and our own future. So for me, Renaissance is not only possible, we have to achieve it. If we want to talk about reparation to others, we have to repair, to heal ourselves first by reconnecting with what we were before our story or our memory was disrupted. We have to get our own healing in order to be stronger, and also to move out of this paradigm of Berlin, which is aimed to separate us from each other. So we have to come together to be stronger, to be more human, and then to talk to the rest of the world with a unique and powerful voice. So this is the message I have.
Thank you so much, Professor. I can hear us saying that let's go back and get it. Sankofa the bird that walks facing backwards, but walking this way. Because we have to remember our past and rectify how it was written. It was written wrongly, and we rewrite it properly. So, because this is Africa, and Africa is our business. So, before I give a final thought to each of the panelists, I would want to open space for the audience. So, if you have a question to any of the panelists, you could throw it, or even all of them. So you are going to note down the question. We just take the questions first, and then you can answer any question that you feel that you are able to answer. So anybody with a question? Okay, we'll take one there. We have another one there, then 3, and then 4 there. We have a question here. This one was the first one.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Chris Kabwato. My question is to Dr. Shivji. You did mention 3 leaders there, Amilcar Cabral, you mentioned Kwame Nkrumah, and Julius Nyerere. Now, when you look at the moment where we are, 2025, whatever that moment is, and you reflect back to those 3 leaders, what is it in them, whether ideologically or their understanding of the moment that they were in, that's so different, or that's absent, if it is absent, in our contemporary society, and which makes maybe our task much more difficult? Thank you.
Thank you. The beautiful lady over there.
Thank you. My name is Anastasia Wanjiku. My question goes to Nana Osei. We appreciate that the fact that the AU has created platforms for these conversations on restitution and restoration within the confines of the institutions. But my question is, even as you bring together the actors on the same, do you have the question of timing? Do you have a set time? Because if you're not careful, these conversations will continue on and on, next generations, until the world ends. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We had another one. Okay, go on.
My name is Tamuka Brian Kagoro. I have one short question and a half. The historical stuff, pyramids, etc., I hear it. Over the last 150 years, Black inventors, Black thespians, Black creatives, Black technologists, or Afro-descended technologists, have created technologies that have fundamentally shifted the trajectory of the world. Including, I always like to cite what young people did here with Ushaidi and etc. There needs to be a bridge between the historical redemption, the power, and this was Amilcar Cabral's component on culture as the premise of liberation, is the power of imagination. It almost seems as though we do not account for the last 150 years as we decry, even with the shekels that we had. There's a lot of storytelling from Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Decolonization of the Mind and how it influenced literature. to Chinua Achebe's notion that we're not children of Africa, we're parents because the Africa we desire is yet to be born. So that's the first question. How are we accounting in terms of, because sometimes we're looking for a lot, and yet there is a lot going on, but not in the populist and popular circles. And a lot of this is being erased even as we struggle.
Thank you, Brian.
And then just one small thing.
Is that the half a question?
The half, yes, the half.
Quick.
Most African education happens through religion. And religion is an institution closer to family, to people. What is your conception of liberation or liberatory education, art and culture within the context of this dominant institution?
Thank you so much. We have the last question there. Please make it quick.
Hello, my name is Mabos from Namibia. One question to Africa Union. And we have been around and, we have this year for reparations. And we have attended a lot of conferences and forums. Do we really have, at that head of state level, political will to implement what we, the grassroots, are talking about when we talk about reparations? The concept.
Thank you. Let's, because now I see other hands.
Yeah,
we have
just one little, madam. Just,
I have to cut you short because we are short of time.
Thank you.
Can, sit with him during the lunchtime. We have the last guy there.
I'm Kelvin. My question goes to one of the panelists who talked about language and how we have to work around that. I think in Kenya we have 42 tribes. In other countries we have more tribes, and each tribe could possibly be having their own language. I'm wondering how we can pass some all this information, or how we bring one language if we won't have to accept the languages that we already have from our past and what they think about it.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think I'll assign, I think some panelists have been given their questions already. Dr. Natasha, you have your question from Chris. Then we do have question for Nana. I think you got 2 questions on AU. And then we have 1.5 question from Tamka Brian, which I'm gonna give to Professor. And then the issue of language and for 2 tribes, I'm going to give to Kinna. So briefly, please, as you answer the question, wrap up your final thoughts. So let's start with Dr. Natasha.
Difficult to think when you're being put in a race.
Yes.
No, I think the question is very important and valid. But I think that what was the language of the time was not of decolonization. It was a language of anti-colonialism, which was necessarily a Pan-Africanist agenda. It had a political vision. It was anti-imperialist. And it dealt with the question of the character of the state. What character would the state take? What would its relationship be to the working people? How would it but how it would serve the interests of the working people. The language today is one of decolonization. The language of decolonization was actually critiqued, as history would have it, by Frantz Fanon. He called this a balkanization of the continent, an Africanization of the continent, which ironically enough was actually going and kicking out other Africans from different nation states. So the idea of developing a nation, the idea of a very middle-class agenda in the nation was attached to the language of decolonization. The language of anti-colonization was the more revolutionary language. It wasn't about reviving our very longue durée histories. By the way, I'm also a historian, and I'm very invested in the longue durée histories of our people, right? This is my work, the long histories of Indian Ocean trade, the kind of intellectual networks across the coast, etc. I'm very invested in this, but I do not see these long histories as a project of reviving the fact that Africans can think, the fact that Africans have moved, the fact that Africans are dignified people, because we know we are. Of course we are. We move in the world as such. The fact that we have history, we know we have that history. But this history has to be excavated. This history has to be revived. It has to be given a certain revolutionary potential. And I think that is the agenda we must have when we're reviving these histories. And all this, I think, to say that even when we think of reparations, it is also a question of excavation. And something that our leaders in that time taught us was that excavation, the Walter Rodneys, the Frantz Fanons, they were very interested, very invested in these long histories. But they were not excavating these histories to assert their humanity. They were excavating these histories to move the world, to revolutionize how the world functioned, right? Hence, you had things like the new international economic order instead of the language of reparations. It was about pleading. You were not a pleading subject. You were a revolutionary citizen. How does that happen? How do we use, and admittedly, the tools for this kind of change and transformation are very limited in our present time. We have been bombarded by neoliberalism, hegemony, any kind of revolutionary hegemony is in crisis. So where do we intervene? We need broad-based movements. We need an alliance between a petty bourgeoisie who is willing to commit class suicide in the words of Amilcar Cabral, right? The intellectual petty bourgeoisie, the state petty bourgeoisie. We need them. There needs to be an alliance with the working people, peasants, workers, okay, alike. But this needs a particular character of the state. These alliances need to make a demand on the state. What language will that demand take? The language of reparations is not simply a language of a demand on the outside world. It is a demand on the state. The state needs to be able to organize its people, to organize history in a revolutionary platform rather than simply in a pleading way to try and get some kind of gain from the outside world.
Thank you so much for that. Kinna, you want to respond
just very quickly
language?
About the language issue, and I will beg of us to not do this, to reform ourselves of how we look at African languages and describing it almost with the European framework, which is that everybody, you are in African country X, and the person with the question did that. He starts by telling us how many, I don't like the word tribes, but how many groups are in Kenya, and then tells us 42 languages, and then it's as though it's chaotic. Before the European incursion of atrocities, we had the exact number of languages we needed to operate on this continent. The exact number. Whether people think it's 1,000, if 1,000 is what the people of this continent needed to operate, we were not running around chaotically. That's one. Two, maybe and most likely, without the European incursion of atrocity, I really like Yvonne's phrasing, we might have standardized on maybe coming from 2,000 to maybe 100. I don't know. But the issue is for us to stop thinking that the diversity of languages we have on this continent is somehow a problem to healing ourselves and getting to know ourselves better. So maybe we will standardize on one,
because
maybe
of time.
on 5. But please let's stop this thing where we think that our diversity of language and of our people is somehow a problem to us. It's not.
Thank you so much, Kinna. It's a very interesting discussion, and I feel so bad having to cut through. So, Nana, Anastasia asked about the set time of the AU on how we can achieve this, and then there was an issue of, is there a political will? Briefly.
Yeah, on the political will, Yeah, I think we really should not minimize the fact that we have multiple decisions at the highest level of the institution in favor of reparations. As we've said before, this has been a discussion that's been ongoing for decades, but this is the first time that we've had our heads of state and government express themselves so specifically on the issue. So I think the political climate is good, and what needs to be done now is how do we leverage that for the objectives that we've set for ourselves. And then with regard to the timeline, I think I prefer maybe to look at it more as, what we are asking for is really not something that is going to be, we're going to get to, point A or benchmark A and that'll be the end. Mm-hmm. It's more about how do we achieve an ongoing rebalancing of the relationships between Africa and Africans and the rest of the world, right? Yeah. Because we need to recover what has been lost, but then once we've got that, we have to make sure that we are able to stay at the same level so that we do not get disenfranchised again going forward. So this is going to be, I think, a longer term engagement and a constant and deliberate effort to ensure that we are able to, for the lack of a better phrase, get what we merit or what we deserve.
Thank you so much for that. And as we wind up briefly, because I think we've broken the rules, there is a question of accountability of time, what has been lost, and also the role of religion, even today, in undermining African history.
Okay. So I wanted to start with a quick reflection about languages, and the person also used the word tribes. This is a word that I encourage my students not to use, because you cannot talk about millions of people as a tribe. And this is very pejorative, by the way. You will never have this word in the Wazungu land. So, no, these are communities and people. And we are all related, even linguistically. So this is, and also the other thing is we are talking about a common language that we can use as Africans, but it does not prevent us to continue using our mother tongue. So I'm very happy to see that in Kenya, for example, when two Kenyans meet, they can use Kiswahili. If one of them is Kikuyu and the other is from another community. So this is okay. So that is what we, as African, we could think about doing too. To use the one language for ourselves, and a language that, those who want to interact with us as Africans has to also to learn, like what we were forced to do. Now about in fact, the question is about the appropriation of our educational system. The one the brother is talking about is the one we inherited from colonialism. Linked to another culture or another religion. If we invent or we come back to our original system of education, and there were many, because remember that we were doing culture progress, inventing the sciences, technology, social organization before slavery, before colonialism. How can we connect back to this? And the documents are there. The evidences are there. So what was our system of education and before the interruption? So this is what, and I think it existed, and we can reconnect to it if you want. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Clap for the wonderful panel. We were under pressure, but we've tried. So thank you so much for this wonderful time. If you have more question and discussion, they are here. You can get hold of them and continue the discussion with them. So thank you so much.